Hey, it's Chris. Welcome to my iPhone 13 Pro's review. That's right, I'm going to be checking out the 13 Pro and the 13 Pro Max. And if you thought that these Pros could not surprise you, well, think again. For instance, it's all about perspective. On the back, you see 3 cameras, but with the new macro mode, you actually end up getting 4, effectively. Also, the very second that I took the 13 Pros out of the box, I noticed the extra weight. Now, I already put together a super in-depth buyer's guide for the whole iPhone 13 lineup, from the 13 mini all the way to the Pro Max. So if you're not sure which iPhone 13 is right for you, I'll link it up down in the description so you can check that out. But in this review, I really want to focus on 3 main upgrades. Number 1, the most wanted upgrade. Number 2, the most practical upgrade. And number 3, the upgrade that's gonna make the biggest difference. Now, the Pro models that I've got here include the 13 Pro in gold and also the 13 Pro Max in the highly sought after Sierra Blue. Now, funnily enough, the smaller Pro here is actually the one with the massive 1 terabyte storage upgrade, while the larger version still has a respectable 512 gigs. But I just wanna mention, you probably heard people say, and I'm among them, that this feels like an S update year. And that I feel like really is largely true, but it's a big S. I'll just say that. Now, other than a slightly smaller notch, which Apple didn't really take advantage of in any significant way, the 13 Pros don't really look much different than previous iPhone models. At least other than the bigger camera bumps and the bigger lenses. That said, the Pro experience is actually quite different if you know where to look. All right, let's start by talking about what has to be the most wanted feature this year on the Pros, the 120 Hz ProMotion display. Now just look at this comparison between last year's 12 Pro Max and this year's 13 Pro Max. This footage was shot at 120 frames per second, and you can clearly see the difference that a faster refresh rate makes. I really don't feel like for the average user it's a must-have, but for a Pro phone at the top end of the iPhone spectrum, I do feel like it's high time for this feature to have arrived. And I'm glad it's an option, and I'll tell you why. Because something like 95% of the things that we do on a phone involves scrolling. And if that's the case, and this is the Pro model, it might as well be the best possible experience. And this year it really is. And that's because the 120 Hertz is adaptable. So it doesn't stay 120 Hertz all the time. There are times when it drops down to 10. So if you just have static text on the screen, or if you have a 30 FPS video playing, or if you're playing a game, then this display is gonna adapt automatically to make sure that you're squeezing the most battery life out of your device as you possibly can, which is really nice. Now, in use, I feel like if I try to notice it, then I notice it. Otherwise, I'm not really thinking about it. Instead, I'm just thinking about what that text actually says. I'm getting lost in the content, which is the whole point of your phone, right? But when I do take the time to notice, it's cool because I feel like my finger is actually moving the stuff on the screen because there's no delay, there's no lag. And one last thing I wanna say about the screen before we move on is that it gets noticeably brighter, especially outside. Now, admittedly, this isn't something that everybody's gonna notice, but if you had a new Pro versus an old Pro side by side outdoors, cranked all the way up, you can notice a difference. All right, let's talk about what I consider to be the most practical upgrade this year, and that would be the extended battery life. I do hear a lot of people talking about not having battery anxiety at the end of the day with these new Pros, which, that's an interesting way of putting it. I don't really get anxiety about the battery. It just gets annoying when I run out of battery, and I don't have that here. And on top of that, for everybody that was complaining about having to use an external battery pack, if you get one of these Pros, you just basically don't have to think about it. If you do a lot of gaming on your iPhone, you're absolutely gonna love the extra battery life here, because games really drain your battery. Also, if you're gonna be a heavy user of the new camera features, especially when it comes to video, and you're gonna have this thing on for a long time doing some shooting, then this extra battery life is actually gonna be essential. All right, so massively better battery life, that's practical. 120 Hertz refresh rate, that was the most wanted upgrade. But I think the cameras are where the biggest updates year over year have actually taken place. Let me dig into that thought just a little bit more. So every year, iPhones get camera updates. Some years it's bigger than others. This year, it's a particularly large camera update, an impressive camera update. if you know where to look. Let me just say though, I'm personally throwing a party in my head because the 13 Pro Max and the regular 13 Pro have the same camera setups this year. So this year you don't have to upgrade to the larger 13 Pro to enjoy the best camera that Apple can give you. Now personally, I'm really excited about that as somebody who came from using the 12 Pro Max last year because I wanted that bigger sensor. So far, I am loving having a smaller footprint, not just in the pocket, because sometimes that's a little bit bulky, but just in hand as well, because I am somebody who uses this camera for professional purposes, and I love bringing the smallest possible portable rig with me that I can get away with and still get really great looking video. So that actually matters to me. And personally, this 13 Pro here is my dream iPhone. Now check this out. Here's the 13 Pro Max next to the 12 Pro Max, and you can just see visually that the camera bump is bigger this year and the actual camera lenses are bigger this year. And that's not all that's bigger. Internally, the sensors are bigger, the pixels are just bigger, which all equates to more light being let into these lenses. And the more light you have, the less noise you have, and the sharper and clearer your photos and videos are gonna be. Now, caveat time is somebody that had not just a Pro last year, but just a regular iPhone, really gonna notice the difference in photos and videos when they're side by side. The average person probably won't. But the second you start digging around in the details, when you zoom in and you actually look for that sharpness, for that clarity, you can absolutely notice it. Needless to say, I haven't seen any serious reviewers saying that this isn't the best camera system that you can get on a phone. Not just an iPhone, on a phone. Now, when I started playing around with the cameras here this year and taking some test photos, there were several times when a photo would stop me from scrolling and I would have to sit there and admire it because of how good it looked. Now, I'm not going overboard. I'm not saying that it would look better than a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, but for photos taken on a phone, this can literally produce stop you in your tracks photos. Now, one of the things that's new here is the macro capabilities, which means the ability to get really close to your subject, which has definitely opened up a whole new world of creativity. I'm seeing things, details that I just never would experience without the macro on this camera. So I stuck this up next to a caterpillar, for instance, and I saw things that my naked eye just wouldn't pick up on. And I felt like it was actually pretty jaw-dropping to see this little critter in so much detail. I think the macro mode is actually gonna end up being a bigger deal than even I realized when I saw the announcement, because now that I have it, I'm out there using it in unexpected ways. And this was actually the first macro shot that I ever took on the 13 Pro, and it just blew me away with how nice and detailed it looked. It's kind of weird though, because it automatically activates itself when you get within a certain distance of your subject, and it's a little bit finicky. Sometimes it works really well. Other times I'm kind of having to move my camera around a lot so that I can activate macro to actually do something with it. So that could use a little bit of improvement. Let me talk about cinematic mode. That's something that Apple's been pushing here this year. And I just want to point out that it's not something that's exclusive to the Pros. The regular iPhone 13s can handle cinematic mode, and I think that tells you a lot. Here's some real life examples of cinematic mode just in my office. Hey, it's Chris. This is just a real test of the iPhone 13 Pro's cinematic mode. I'm just here in my office. You can see I don't have any special lighting going on. I'm not using an external microphone. I just want to see what this looks like, and I want to show you what it looks like, what it sounds like, and are we impressed? Do we think it needs to be improved? I'm guessing it's a little bit of both. But anyways, this is what it looks like. Now, cinematic mode is new. I will say it's fun. I don't see this being used by professional people really this year. Although I did see a short film called Float, which I highly recommend checking out if you really want to see what someone can do when they're trying their hardest to make this look actually cinematic. So let's just say it's something that's going to improve over time that's just kind of fun to use right now. Another thing that's new here this year is profiles. You can kind of set this default look for the photos that you take. So if you tend to like warmer or cooler or more vibrant or contrasty photos, you can just dial that in once. Actually, the first time that you launch your camera on your new phone, Apple's gonna ask you, and then it's gonna glue that look that you select onto your photos automatically for you. So it's not something that you have to do photo by photo. I think this is kind of cool because normally Apple just leaves your photos alone. They kind of make it more natural. But here, probably in order to compete with what Samsung and Google are offering, they're letting you have a little bit more choice right out of the gate instead of having to take extra time to edit stuff to get it how you like it later. And I should point out, Apple doesn't really consider these filters per say, because it's not a dumb filter just being applied across the board to every object in the scene. Instead, the AI is able to pick out, okay, that's a face, those are clouds, that's some grass, and keep those looking a certain way. You know, keep your skin tones looking good, for instance. I mean, it's kind of cool. It's not a groundbreaking feature, I don't feel like, but I like that vibrant look a little bit, so that's what I'm using. But for more on the storage, on the processor, on the connectivity, I would recommend checking out my iPhone 13 buying guide, because I broke down all of that stuff there in detail. Like I've said before, to me, iPhones are tools. I get a lot done with them. And if I'm looking at a pro iPhone, then I'm looking at something that I consider a pro tool. And I really couldn't be happier with what the pros offer this year, especially the smaller Pro with its just amazing camera system. I hope you found the information and the demos and the comparisons in this review useful. If you want to continue the conversation with me, get yourself subscribed to the podcast, because I'm sure to be talking about more iPhone 13 and Pro stuff there, along with other Apple stuff. You know, I just got the new iPads. I'm talking about it all. Get yourself subscribed to the podcast, and I'll look forward to catching up in the next video. Later.